My so-called golden boy brother once hired a private investigator hoping to dig up proof that I was a complete failure. Instead, the guy ended up stumbling across something very different. Turns out I was sitting on a multi-million-dollar success. I grew up in a small, tight-knit village with my two siblings. I'm the middle child. In a town that's small, where everybody knows everybody, that can be both a blessing and a curse. My dad's the kind of man who's always been a hard worker, but not the type to show how he's feeling. These days, he's thinking about hanging it up and retiring. My mom, on the other hand, couldn't be more different. She's always kept the home running and held fast to the old-school values she was raised with. Both of my parents come from deeply traditional, religious backgrounds. I do love them, no question, but deep down, I've always felt like I somehow missed the mark with them. It stings to feel like they see me as the family's let down. Meanwhile, my older brother's the one they proudly show off, their shining star. He's 40 now, married to a quiet, reserved woman. Their two boys are wild about sports, especially the rough-and-tumble kind. Honestly, they're a handful. My brother's taken it upon himself to guide me through life. He sells cars at a local dealership, but when he tries to mentor me, it never really feels genuine. It's more like he treats me as some personal pet project he can't quite fix, like I should be grateful for whatever time he decides I deserve. He loves to paint this perfect picture of his life, bragging about his kids' athletic feats, his powerboat, his ATVs. But his advice usually turns into him flexing about his big house, his collection of cars, and his so-called trophy wife. All of that just leaves me feeling more isolated. Back in school, I was the sensitive kid who cried too easily and always seemed to have an excuse for why things didn't work out. I wasn't strong, I wasn't athletic, I wasn't what people admired. I got teased a lot, left out of most things, and having asthma only made it worse. The hardest part? My parents never took asthma seriously. And then, there's the depression. I've been wrestling with that for as long as I can remember. I wasn't the kind of kid who could sprint across a football field or throw a perfect spiral. My folks often reminded me I wasn't as sharp or outgoing as my older brother. They constantly drew comparisons, and I never came out ahead. School was rough. I barely scraped by with a 2.5 GPA in high school. Eventually, I saved up enough money to try college, but I dropped out during my second year. That move caused quite a stir in the family. My younger sister? She was always treated like the princess. I didn't get to know her well because I left when she was still a teenager. What I've gathered about her mostly comes from seeing her as an adult. She's not a bad person, just kind of spoiled. Maybe it's easier for her to go along with the way our parents and brother treat me rather than stand out as a target herself. She got married at 19 in a big, beautiful wedding, and now she's got 3 kids of her own. Strangely enough, I feel the most connection with her middle child. She's also the middle one, like me. She gets teased quite a bit, and maybe because her struggles mirror mine a little, I feel like I really understand her. After I left college, I started leaning into the nerdy, shy parts of myself instead of running from them. For a while, I worked at a comic book and video game shop in my hometown, probably the job I loved the most. It closed down over 7 years ago, but my parents still act like that's where I work. The best part of that job? Meeting another nerd who had some serious ambition. Together, we built an IT support company that ended up doing really well. Eventually, he decided to sell the business to a bigger company. As part of the buyout, I walked away with cash and stock options, and the deal turned out great. Since then, I've launched some side ventures and made a few smart investments, some of which really paid off. I don't go around bragging, but I've managed to build up more than $1 million in assets. Right now, I'm working as the Chief Technology Officer for a new startup. Even with all that, I keep things simple. I live in a cozy 2-bedroom place in a great neighborhood, filled with second-hand furniture, and I drive a 15-year-old Saturn. I'm single at the moment. Life keeps me busy, and I see my therapist regularly. Like my asthma and my depression, I also struggle with alcohol. That's another thing my parents just don't take seriously. They chalk it up to mental stuff and brush it off. Still, I've managed to build a life for myself, one that works for me, even if it doesn't look the way they expected. Every Sunday, I'm expected to drive across the state for family dinner. It's not a quick trip. It takes an hour and a half, sometimes 2, each way. That's most of my weekend gone. And yet, they act like I've got nothing better to do because I'm single, and, as my brother likes to call me, the family's mental case. These dinners aren't exactly relaxing. They usually involve 3 hours of unsolicited advice about how I should settle down, start a family, and become a real adult. Or I get stuck listening to my brother brag about his latest big sale at the dealership, like it's the event of the century. They've never flat out called me a freeloader, but if I skip one of these dinners, it's definitely implied. It's frustrating and honestly, a bit confusing. I talk to my therapist about it a lot, why I keep showing up, why I keep trying. My family either downplays or completely distorts everything I've achieved. Most people back home still assume I'm working at that long-gone game store. Meanwhile, my brother's always been seen as the charismatic one with a solid career. Because of that old job in retail, I was constantly the butt of jokes. My time working at the comic and game store was always used against me like it was something shameful. That gap between my real life and what my family thought it was made it nearly impossible to explain who I really was or what I'd accomplished. Comics and video games? They were seen as childish nonsense. No matter how much knowledge I had when it came to tech, every time I tried to talk about it, I got drowned out. My brother had a habit of butting in, acting like I was clueless, as if he was the one with the expertise. Even though I could tell he was just bluffing most of the time, I usually stayed quiet and let him ramble. The truth is, I was nervous about calling him out, because doing that would mean explaining my whole career, defending my work, justifying myself. A part of me was always afraid that they wouldn't take me seriously, and once they knew the truth, they'd judge me even harder. I'll be the first to admit, I've had my fair share of setbacks. I've made mistakes. I've had days where I've felt completely lost. But then, everything shifted, just last month, actually. Turns out my brother had been snooping around in my business. He somehow got access to some of my private info, and later I found out the truth. He had actually hired a private investigator to do what he claimed was a background check on my work life. Something about it didn't sit right. I had this feeling that he was planning some kind of intervention with my parents. But they weren't ready for what the investigator actually found. Instead of dirt, they discovered that I wasn't some struggling failure living in a rundown apartment. I was actually doing pretty damn well for myself. They got a peek into my real life, the one they never bothered to ask about. What made the whole thing more ironic is that I work in cybersecurity. I noticed something was off when I started getting alerts about someone trying to access my credit report. I followed the breadcrumbs and managed to trace the breach back to the source. That moment pulled the curtain back on everything. Suddenly my family had to confront a version of me they didn't expect, one that didn't line up with the story they'd been telling themselves for years. It was a lot to take in, especially considering how little they've ever understood or appreciated me. And honestly, I was angry. So angry, in fact, that I decided to turn the tables. I hired the same private investigator, only this time, I asked them to dig into my brother's finances. And what came back? It was jaw-dropping. My brother, the guy who made a career out of acting like he had it all figured out, was living way beyond his means. The report uncovered a history with Child Protective Services, past arrests for DWIs and public drunkenness, even records of domestic disturbance calls. On top of that, he was behind on IRS payments and juggling 3 mortgages on his house. While there were no active charges against him, his financial situation was an absolute disaster. My parents, by comparison, were exactly who I thought they were: modest, frugal, and practical when it came to money. I was so focused on preparing for our next family dinner, bracing for what I thought would be a full-blown confrontation, that I didn't even stop to think about how my sister was doing. But that dinner didn't go anything like I imagined. The energy was off. My parents suddenly started treating me like some kind of hero, like I was the one who had everything together. It was like they had flipped the script, and now I was the golden child. The change was so weird and uncomfortable, you could feel the tension rising. My brother couldn't take it. Midway through dinner, he lost it. He got loud, throwing out big numbers about his recent sales, claiming he was up for a big promotion, clearly trying to save face. I just smiled, told him congrats, and gently reminded him about the IRS debt, the mounting credit problems, and the loans he was buried under. So yeah, I called him out, but I did it in a way that acknowledged the good while shining a light on the mess. The whole exchange had a heavy, almost dark vibe to it. My parents' sudden praise felt awkward, almost fake, and it made everything around the table that much more uncomfortable. When I handed my brother the printed report, he denied all of it at first. But I pointed out that he had set this whole thing in motion. He was the one who opened the door when he hired someone to investigate me. I'll admit, getting that moment of poetic justice felt good, for a second, anyway. My parents were full of dramatic gasps and moral outrage, pretending like they were shocked. But it was obvious they weren't totally surprised. What really freaked me out was that accessing the report had required my social security number, meaning my privacy had been violated in a serious way. The fallout was ugly. My disappointment in them deepened. The whole thing just exposed their greed, their fear, and their willingness to turn on each other. Over the next hour, they spiraled into a blame game, pointing fingers and dragging out old grievances. I tried to keep my mouth shut, but every now and then they'd turn on me, angry and looking for someone to lash out at. When that happened, I mostly shrugged or gave short, casual responses, trying not to pour fuel on the fire. The rest of the family just sat there, stunned. My sister's husband, my brother's wife, and all 5 kids watched in disbelief as our family imploded right in front of them. Normally, these dinners were boring and predictable. My sister would share a few updates, my brother and his wife would brag, my mom would make small talk, and my dad would grumble about something. That night, none of that happened. Instead, it was chaos. The usual subtle digs about how I should be more like my brother, how I wasn't man enough, were replaced with awkward silence and shocked stares. I ended up in a full-blown argument with my dad, my brother, and even myself, if that makes sense. We dragged out every bit of unresolved drama from the last 30 years, and fought over who had screwed up what and when. It felt like a bad soap opera unfolding in real time. All the resentment I'd bottled up was suddenly justified, but it didn't feel good. Honestly, I just felt awful. Yeah, maybe I could have felt triumphant, like I'd finally proven them wrong. But instead, I felt guilty. I realized I hadn't handled any of it well. I knew about my brother's skeletons, but what did I really hope to gain by exposing them? Now his kids had a front-row seat to their dad's dark past, and that was never what I wanted. Everything boiled over when my brother, red in the face and shaking with rage, exploded and shouted at me across the table. When he looked me in the eye and said, "You should have never been born," I was stunned. But honestly, what hit me even harder was how frantic my parents got trying to calm him down. I'd never seen that level of desperation from them before. He blamed me for everything that had ever gone wrong in the family. And while my parents stepped in to stop the shouting, they still couldn't bring themselves to admit the years of mistreatment I'd lived through. There was no apology, no real acknowledgement, just a surface-level effort to smooth things over. I felt crushed. But at the same time, a part of me felt seen finally. As brutal as it was, the moment laid bare all the dysfunction that had been bubbling under the surface of our family dynamic for years. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my parents turned on me with a new accusation. They claimed I had refused to help a niece or nephew who was seriously ill, something I had never even heard about. No one had ever reached out to me. Not a call, not a text. Nothing. It felt like they were just making things up on the spot to keep the blame on me. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I reminded them, "I thought you still believed I was working at that comic book store." They'd never really grasped the fact that the shop had closed down back in 2011, even though I'd mentioned it to them more than once. It just blew my mind how far off their version of the family history was, twisted to fit whatever narrative made them feel better. I drove home that night with my chest tight, frustrated and overwhelmed. And now, sitting with everything that happened, I feel completely torn. Now that they know I'm financially secure, I have this sinking feeling they'll start asking for favors, or worse, try to guilt me into giving them money. I've seen them do it before with my brother. I know the pattern. And while I do appreciate the fact that they gave me the basics growing up, food, a roof over my head, clothes, I also know I don't owe them my peace of mind. It's going to take some real work, probably with my therapist, to sort through all this, how to balance gratitude with resentment, and how to set boundaries that I can actually live with. Growing up was never easy. I was never the favorite. Not even close. My brother treated me terribly, and while my parents didn't lay a hand on me, they stood by and did nothing while he kicked me, hit me, and hurled awful words my way. They acted like it didn't happen. And to this day, they still don't seem to understand that emotional abuse is real. Just because it doesn't leave bruises doesn't mean it doesn't scar you. Being ignored when you're hurting, that does something to you. I've fought this battle for a long time. And now, I'm just tired. I know they're family, but I'm ready to keep my distance, for good. I don't wish them harm. I hope they live their lives in peace. But for my own well-being, I need to move forward and close that chapter. Sometimes I wonder, what happens if I meet someone special, maybe fall in love, get married, start a family of my own? How do I explain my family situation? Do I even let them meet? That's the hard part. The future feels a little uncertain. I'm trying to figure out how to cross that bridge when I get there. Because the idea of blending my life with someone else's, especially if they're close to their own family, brings up a whole new set of questions. But here's the thing, I've come to realize something important, and I hope anyone else dealing with this kind of family pain hears this too. If your family only wanted you around to boost their own image, or now, to take advantage of your success, they didn't value you. They valued what you could do for them. That's not love. That's opportunism. You're not defined by your family. From everything I've lived through, it's clear they were the problem, not me. I'm not perfect, but I've worked hard to build a life that's stable, good, and honest. So if you're in a similar boat, here's what I'd say. Step away from the noise. Shut off your phone. Live your life on your terms. Set whatever limits you need with your family. They don't get to write your story anymore. And if you can, get help. Stick with therapy. It helps more than you realize. Make a clean break from the pointless arguments and constant guilt trips. If it's even remotely possible, consider relocating. Pack up, move on, and start fresh somewhere new. You'd be surprised how many people out there are going through the same family drama, especially when it comes to dating or building a future with someone. It's not easy explaining this stuff to a partner, especially if they come from a warm, close-knit family. But your story matters. Your pain is real. And when the time comes, you'll build your own version of family, one that feels safe and healthy and yours. Steps I'm taking now. First off, I've locked down my credit. If my brother really used dealership resources to dig into my personal life, that could be considered fraud. I'm not letting it slide. If necessary, I'll bring it to the attention of the dealership, and maybe even a lawyer. Even though I'm relatively young, life throws curveballs. So I've started working on my will and making sure someone I trust is listed as the beneficiary of my assets, not just by default, but legally documented. And finally, I'm staying consistent with therapy. I know the months ahead might bring some grief, even guilt. But I need to process that pain so I don't carry it into the next season of my life. Driving home from that family dinner felt like retreating from a war zone. The road was quiet, but my head was loud, filled with everything that had been said, everything I wished I'd done differently. When I pulled into my driveway, one thing was crystal clear. Something had to change. And it had to start with me. If I wanted to hold onto my sanity, the family dinners had to stop, at least for a while. For the next couple of weeks, I threw myself into work and focused on my mental health. My home, cluttered with gadgets and comic books, wasn't just some nerdy mess. It was my refuge, my safe zone. Surrounded by things that made sense to me, I felt like I could breathe again. During that stretch, I doubled up on therapy appointments, trying to figure out how to create some space between me and my family, without totally cutting them off. Dr. Ellison, my therapist, really helped with that. He didn't just tell me to put up walls. Instead, he helped me build something sturdier and more thoughtful, boundaries that protected me but didn't isolate me. As the days got warmer and summer started creeping in, my mind began to shift toward the future. For the first time in a while, I allowed myself to imagine being with someone. Not just a passing thought, but a real, solid connection. And wouldn't you know it, like something out of one of those comic books on my shelf, Leah walked into my life. We met at a tech conference. She was giving a cybersecurity talk, and I was immediately hooked, not just by the topic, but by her. She had this way about her, smart, grounded, calm. She got me in a way few people ever had. Leah believed in love, but not the kind wrapped in guilt or control. She believed in love with boundaries and mutual respect. As we grew closer, one question hung in the air like static. How the hell do I introduce her to my circus of a family? We had more than a few pizza-fueled brainstorming nights trying to figure that one out. Eventually, we decided to take it slow. Short, low-pressure visits with the family, nothing too deep, nothing too long. Leah even offered to come with me, which honestly changed everything. We started with simple coffee meetups. I eased back into family gatherings with Leah by my side. And yeah, the first few were awkward. My parents were polite, overly cautious, like they were worried I might bolt at any moment. My brother looked like he wanted to say something meaningful, but couldn't quite figure out how. But my sister, and especially her kids, were a nice distraction from the tension. Her middle child, the one who reminds me so much of myself, took to Leah right away. We made a routine out of those short visits. Think of them like little scouting missions into family territory, just enough to show my face, but not long enough to get sucked into the old drama. It worked better than I expected. Over time, things actually started to shift. My family, surprisingly, adjusted. Maybe they realized this was the only way I was willing to stay in touch. They began respecting my boundaries. Not perfectly, but noticeably. As that settled, I started thinking more seriously about the long haul. What would it look like to build a future with someone like Leah? Not one based on shame, pressure, or performance, but on real, mutual care. I knew the road wouldn't be smooth. One warm evening, Leah and I were walking along the lake when we talked about the idea of living together. And it hit me just how far I'd come. From feeling totally abandoned by my family to being able to stand tall, to find my own space, and let love in. I don't know if I'd call it happiness, but I felt something close, hope, maybe even excitement. The kind of cautious optimism that whispers, hey, things might actually be okay. Creating boundaries with my family, especially with Leah in the picture, wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about making space for something better, for love, for peace, for the kind of future I used to think I'd never have. The legendary Sunday dinners still happen, but they look different now. I show up when I want to, skip when I don't. Leah comes with me sometimes, and we talk through anything weird afterward. Things aren't perfect. Some stuff's still hard. But now, I'm learning how to keep the peace without letting it consume me. There's me, obviously. Then there's Nina, our daughter. Eli, our son. And Rachel, my soon-to-be ex-wife. We're in the middle of a tough separation, and to be real, it's getting messy. She told me she wanted to open our marriage. I wasn't okay with that. I tried to process it, tried to understand, but it wasn't something I could accept. And things went from bad to worse when I found out she'd slept with one of my coworkers. One of my closest friends. That wrecked me. I felt betrayed by both my marriage and my job. As a police officer, you learn to keep a straight face through a lot. But that hit deep. We couldn't come back from it. I needed space. Time to think. Rachel, at first, did everything she could to keep us together. But once she saw that I wasn't budging, that I wasn't going to agree to an open marriage, things turned bitter, fast. Her whole tone changed. She started twisting things. She told Nina that I didn't love them anymore. That I was the reason our family was falling apart. That I didn't want them in the house. It broke my heart. Nina was clearly confused and hurting, and I hated that. Our kids visit Rachel now, over at her place with her new partner. And they try to turn those visits into some kind of magical vacation adventure. It's become pretty clear that Rachel and her new partner, let's just call them AP, are trying to win our kids over by playing the fun parents role. They shower Nina and Eli with toys, sweets, and endless praise, probably hoping to turn them against me. And honestly, things between Rachel and me have gone from strained to impossible. We can't seem to agree on anything these days. Every conversation turns into a standoff, whether it's about dividing up our stuff, deciding who owes what financially, or worst of all, figuring out a schedule for the kids. That part, splitting up time with Nina and Eli, is by far the most painful. Every attempt at compromise gets blocked. It's like Rachel's making things harder on purpose. Lately, she's been telling our kids things that make me look like the villain. Stuff that's just not true. The other day, both of them asked me if I don't like AP because I'm jealous. It hit me hard. They said AP loves them more than I do. I mean, what do you even say to that? It's messing with their heads. A few weeks ago, I was deep in a big case at work. I've been pushing hard to move up from regular duty to homicide investigator, working long shifts, sacrificing sleep, chasing the next step in my career. Rachel and I had agreed, during that stretch, the kids would stay with her, and I'd see them on weekends. That was the plan. One day, I stopped by to pick them up for the weekend. I had their stuff packed up, ready to go. As I handed Eli his suitcase, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Are you taking us away because you hate us?" "That's what Mommy said." That moment broke something in me. I dropped to my knees, hugged him tight, and told him, no matter what he'd heard, I loved him more than anything. And I meant every word. But no matter what I do, these visits keep getting harder. Last weekend, they barely spoke to me. It felt like they didn't even want to be around me, like I was some stranger just passing through. Today, I finally got another chance to see them. When I picked them up, I could see it on their faces, especially Nina. Something's not right. She still shows me love in little ways, but it's like Rachel's making it harder for her to express it. And now, I'm faced with the toughest question of all. How do I protect my kids from getting caught in the crossfire of this divorce? Nina has started believing she's not allowed to love me. That somehow, it's wrong or disloyal to feel close to her dad. And I can't sit by and let that happen. I've done everything I can to keep things peaceful, but now I'm wondering if I need to take this to the next level. Should I push the divorce further? Go after more custody? Is there a way to move forward without doing more damage? Or am I already too deep into it? Because right now, it feels like this divorce is hurting them more than it's helping anyone. You need to get your divorce attorney involved immediately. What Rachel's doing is called parental alienation, and it's serious. Judges don't take it lightly. While it's hard to enforce, the courts can intervene, and they should. Don't wait. Start documenting everything. Every twisted word. Every time the kids say something that sounds like it came from Rachel. Keep a journal. Save texts and voicemails. If you can, record conversations, as long as it's legal in your state. Your next step is to make sure this behavior is officially on the record. Talk to your attorney. Push forward with the divorce. The longer you wait, the more damage gets done. In fact, a friend of mine won custody for this exact reason. His ex was manipulating their daughter, telling her lies about him, poisoning their relationship. The court saw right through it. You should also think about getting the kids into therapy. Let a licensed professional help them unpack the confusion and fear they're feeling. If Rachel's behavior crosses the line, don't hesitate to bring in CPS or file for emergency custody. These aren't easy decisions, but doing nothing is worse.